Even if you've never made pie before, I'm showing you how easily you can make my gluten-free maple pumpkin pie with a flaky almond flour crust. You simply press in the pie crust without any need for a rolling pin or a mess of dusted flour. It's naturally sweetened with maple syrup and coconut sugar, and it is full of rich flavor from pumpkin puree, fresh ginger, almond and maple extract, and all your guests will love it regardless of whether or not they have a gluten allergy. We're gonna start by making our pie crust. But first we want to chill our pie plate in the freezer so that it's nice and cold, which will help our butter stay nice and cool while we're shaping our crust. So I'm just gonna set this in my freezer. Next, you'll want to get a medium-sized mixing bowl, and then we're going to add 2 cups of almond flour, 1/3 cup of tapioca flour, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of dried ginger, 1/2 teaspoon salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And then we'll simply whisk these together till they're well combined. Next, we want to cut in 1/3 cup of butter. So we're just gonna take some cold butter right out of our fridge, and then we can use the little paper guideline to cut off a piece so that we're left with 1/3 cup. And then we'll just go through and cut it into some smaller slices. And then I'll also cut it crosswise. And if you're really into it, you can make some little cubes. And then we can drop them right into our bowl. Now to blend in the butter, you could use like a pastry cutter, or I found it's really easy to just use my hands. So I'm just pressing those little cubes of butter and then mushing them in with the flour. It's a really good stress exercise for your hands. And you could also come in with a fork and just kind of smash down your little bits of butter. And now that we have this nice crumbly consistency, we're going to add our wet ingredients. So in a small bowl, we're going to add 1 egg plus 1 tablespoon of maple syrup for a little bit of sweetness. And as an option to give it a little more flavor, I'm adding 1/8 teaspoon of some almond extract. And then we'll mix this together with a fork until the egg is incorporated. You can already smell that almond. Now we can pour this over our dough. And then I'll just use a spatula to mix it in. I find this is a little bit easier and neater than using my hands. So I'm just gonna spin my bowl around with my hand and mash down all the ingredients till I have a nice soft dough. And just keep turning the dough over until it incorporates all the dry ingredients. And then you're left with this really soft, wonderful dough that has a similar consistency to like a cookie dough. And if you can roll a ball in your hand without it sticking to your fingers, you know that it's just the right consistency. If it's too wet, you can go ahead and just add another tablespoon of the almond flour, just 1 at a time until it's dry enough. And if it's too dry, you can add 1/2 teaspoon of water at a time until it's moist enough to be able to form a little dough ball. So now I'm gonna use my spatula and spread the dough out in my bowl. And then I'm gonna put the bowl in my freezer while we make the filling. And that's gonna give the dough a chance to really chill and harden up, which is gonna make it even easier to form in our pie plate. To make the pumpkin pie filling, you can use either a high-speed upright blender or you can use your food processor like I am. I'm gonna start by adding 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree. And this is different than pumpkin pie filling. Next, we're gonna give this a delicious protein boost from cottage cheese. I'm adding 1/2 cup of cottage cheese, and you can use large curd, small curd, non-fat, low-fat, whatever your preference. Next, we'll add 1/3 cup of coconut sugar, 1/3 cup maple syrup, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And as an option to enhance that maple flavor, I'm just going to add about 3 drops of some maple extract. And as a thickener, we'll add 2 tablespoons of tapioca flour, and 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now to add some really delicious and vibrant flavor, I'm going to add some fresh ginger. So you'll just take your ginger and cut off the edge to expose the flesh. And then just taking your zesting grater, go ahead and zest the ginger, and you'll instantly get that delicious aroma. And then we'll drop in the equivalent to 1/2 teaspoon of ginger. And if you don't have fresh ginger, you can use the same amount of dry ginger. Now we want to put on our lid and then mix this on high until it's well incorporated and we no longer see any of that curdled cottage cheese texture. And now we can add in our eggs because we didn't want them to get over blended. So I'm adding 3 eggs, and then I'll mix this on low just until they're incorporated. Well, that looks fantastic and it smells incredible. And now we can set this aside while we make our crust. Well, I got my pie plate and my dough out of the freezer and they are nice and chilled. But first we want to prepare our pie plate by spraying it with some non-stick, and I'm just going to use some coconut oil. And then we can drop our crust right into our pan. And since it's already kind of spread out in my bowl, I'll go ahead and just kind of leave it in these flatter chunks. Now this gluten-free pie crust is a little different than a traditional pie crust in that you don't have to roll it out with the rolling pin, sprinkle on more flour, and then very carefully and cautiously lay it into your pan. Instead, we can push this crust around similar to a cookie dough. So I'm going to go in and just start roughly spreading it out so that I know I have even coverage. Now I really like having a big chunky crust, so I want it to be a little thicker up towards the top. And you can see those little chunks of butter, but don't worry, they do not have to be blended in. They're going to bake nice and smooth. So once I have enough around the outer edge, I'll go ahead and start spreading out in the middle. You can decide if you want more of a rough finish on your upper edge or if you want to make those really fun little flute shapes. So to make the flutes, I'm going to first go around the top and just kind of smooth it down, as well as try to even out the thickness. So to create that fluted edge on top, you're just going to take your thumb and your first knuckle, and then you're going to push them into the side of your dough. So I'm just going to push down with my thumb and up with my knuckle. So that will create one flute. And then next to that first flute, I'll go ahead and push my thumb down and lift my knuckle to make the next flute. And I'll just continue to do this all the way around the pie. And I can smooth it down as I go. Now this crust is very forgiving, so once you've gone around your pie, you can continue to smooth it and shape it to be as rustic or as nice and neat as you would like. So I'm just going to go back in and smooth some of the edges so that I have some nice round flutes. And then as soon as you're content with your crust creation, we can go ahead and pour in our pumpkin filling. So I'm just going to pour it right down into the center, and that filled our crust perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and just make one kind of little swirly pattern right in the middle and lift right in the center. So to help our pie cook evenly, we want to cover it with some aluminum foil. That's going to help keep the upper edge of the crust from becoming overcooked or even burned. Now you can use a pie shield that's going to go all the way around and just cover your crust and leave the center exposed, but I found it works really easy to just cover the entire pie for the first 40 minutes and then take the foil off for the last 15 minutes. So I'm just going to trim a piece of foil a little bigger than my pan, and then I want to make sure that the center is high so that it doesn't accidentally touch the pumpkin pie filling. So on these two outer edges, I'm just going to make some little creases, and then I can kind of puff up the center. And I'll take those two creases, put them down onto the edges of the pie pan, and just gently fold them under. Now we want it to be fairly loose so that plenty of air can circulate in and out while the pie cooks. So now it's ready to go into a 350-degree oven for 40 minutes. And then I'm going to open the oven, take off the foil, and then set my timer for an additional 15 minutes. And then I'll check it after that 15 minutes with a toothpick to see if it's done. When that toothpick goes in, if it comes out with a lot of batter on it, then you know it's not quite done yet. Then we'll add an additional 5 minutes and check it again with our toothpick. And once that toothpick can come out without any batter, but maybe a little bit orange, then we know that it is ready. So you'll end up baking your pie anywhere between 50 to 65 minutes, depending on your oven and your humidity. So here's a pie that I baked yesterday and stored in my fridge, and you can see how gorgeous this is. The crust is just golden brown all the way around the outside, and it just has that really chunky fluted texture to it. And then the pumpkin filling is just that beautiful pumpkin color and has just a couple of those characteristic cracks kind of like right in the middle. Now I would cut into this pie, but I'm actually saving it for a family dinner. So instead I have a slice here of one of my sample pies with the exact same recipe. Now you can serve the pie plain as is, or you can add some ice cream or some whipped cream, which is my favorite. I prefer to whip it myself, and then I can very easily just pipe on a nice big pile of whipped cream right on top. Oh, that looks good. And you can see how perfectly set that pie filling is, and then with just that soft crust underneath that's just perfectly golden brown and practically the same color as the upper edge of the pie crust. That is divine. That is so good. That is a smooth and creamy burst of amazing pumpkin spice flavors. I instantly get the fresh flavor of the pumpkin, and then I get those spices coming in with the cinnamon and that fresh ginger. And I love the texture and flavor of that buttery almond flour crust. And that flavor just gets better and better and leaves the most delicious aftertaste. And I love that it's made with clean, natural ingredients and that I'm gonna feel just as good even after I eat it. It has so much more interesting and complex flavor from the almond and the maple, and avoiding the refined sugar as well as the white flour. And as you can see, this couldn't be any easier to make. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today in my kitchen, and I've included a link to the full recipe in the video description below, and it's on my website, gentletummy.com. And I also invite you to like and subscribe to my channel. And if you know someone else who you think would love to have this recipe, please share this video with them. And I cannot wait to have you hang out with me again in my kitchen.